To our panelists and conference attendees, good morning. And in case I can't see you, which I can't, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Thank you for joining us for what we expect to be a fascinating discussion on the topic of bringing COVID-19 vaccines to low and middle income countries. It's going to dovetail very nicely with Dr. Pate's talk. And we're very glad that the panel was positioned the way it was because of that connection. My name is Noel Watson, and I'm a supply chain researcher in global health and a member of the organizing committee of this Global Health Supply Chain Summit. I also hail from Jamaica, a small but well-known island in the Caribbean, so the issue at hand for the panel has personal interest for me. On our panel today, we have four great perspectives on this topic. First, we have Dr. Jean Lee, a senior economist from the World Bank's Office of the Chief Economist for South Asia, who has worked extensively on financing mechanisms and efforts for COVID-19 related commodities. Next, we have Dr. Julian Magini, MD, PhD, who is the Chief Medical Officer of a vaccine pharmaceutical company in Argentina, which is itself working on a COVID-19 vaccine. And he's also the Technology Transfer Manager at Universidad Austral, one of the best universities, ranked one of the best universities in Argentina. So he'll bring a Latin American perspective. Next, we have Dr. Skumbuzo in Gozwana, who is a farmer manufacturing expert from Africa, CEO of Kiara Health, a pharmaceutical manufacturer in South Africa, and chairman for BioVac, a South African vaccine manufacturer. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dikez Ndembe, Director of Laboratory Research at University of Maryland's Institute of Human Virology, and an important advisor to the African CDC's and African Union's efforts on bringing a COVID-19 vaccine to Africa. Our approach in today's panel is that I'll be posing questions to individual panelists specific to their expertise for about an hour, and then take some questions from the attendees. Although specific questions will be posed to specific panelists, this does not mean that other panelists cannot weigh in on the question with their perspective and are encouraged to do so. So, wanted to start off with, to set the stage for the discussion, wanted to start off with one of our medical doctors, Julian Magini. Julian, as Dr. Pate showed, there are currently 12 COVID-19 vaccines in phase 3 trials around the globe. 3 are inactivated vaccines, 2 from China, 1 from India. 1 is a live attenuated vaccine, that's the original BCG vaccine. 4 use viral vectors, AstraZeneca and Oxford, Johnson & Johnson, and the Russian vaccine Sputnik. 2 are mRNA-based vaccines from Mrna and Pfizer, and we've had great news recently on early results from trials for these. While the last 2 are nanoparticle vaccine from Novavax and a virus-like particle from GSK Medicago. The particles are among us. Can you briefly describe these different vaccine technologies, and assuming a safe and efficacious vaccine based on each technology, how should LMICs consider which one to buy?
Okay, Noel, thank you for the introduction. Thank you also for inviting me here. It's a strange environment for me as a MD PhD, but it's very interesting to see. So these technologies are quite new. There are a few technologies that are being tested for the first time right now. I'm going to move through all of them a little bit quick. So inactivated SARS-CoV-2 technology is it's the wild-type virus that is industrially scaled up, and then it's subjected to chemical treatments that renders it ineffective. It can't produce the disease, but it yet maintains the structure by which our body recognizes the proteins of the virus. So it triggers an immune response that will protect you later when you get infected with the virus at some point, if you do. So this technology is quite proven. There are a lot of vaccines of this kind in the past. They are not supposed to be the ones that gives you the long-term protection beyond the year, but yet it's to be proven how they will work in this setting in particular. The other ones which I like very much, are the viral vector vaccines. These are vaccines that use a different kind of viruses. Right now, all of them are adenoviruses. These are common cold disease, upper respiratory tract disease, that is non-replicative. It means that it's genetically modified, so it can't infect, it can't produce any disease, but you can introduce the information so that the virus, once inoculated, produces the spike protein from the SARS-CoV-2 in our muscle cells. So we have like tiny factories working for us, producing the spike protein for a long period of time. So the immune system protects you against this protein, the spike protein. And they are supposed to be one of the best technologies, just because it's been proven in the past that the adenoviruses are very strong immunogens by themselves, the structure of the adenovirus. So it triggers a very strong protective immune response, a cellular immune response that has been proven useful in another kind of diseases for at least 2 years. So these ones may be the best ones. We will see in the future how they work. Third one's very interesting, the mRNA vaccines you mentioned, Moderna, Pfizer. This is the latest technology, really interesting. It could be, I don't know, something really new for industry in many diseases, not only for vaccines, but also for cancer, etc. Moderna has high expectations for this kind of technology, but it's new, so we have to prove it. We have to test if this really works. The idea is you get the RNA that codifies for the same structure, the spike protein, and you get it protected inside a nanovesicle, a lipidic particle that protects the RNA from enzymes that would destroy RNA, which is highly unstable, so you have to protect it from the environment. So this technology, once it's inoculated, these nanovesicles get the RNA inside the cells of the individual, and they also produce with that code the protein, the spike protein, for long periods of time. So they may prove really useful. They may be a game changer. We'll have to see in the next couple of months how they work. So far, they look really good. There are one other protein-based technology. This is a very common technology. You upscale the protein, in this case, the spike protein, and then you inoculate it together with an adjuvant, which is it's a product, that a substance that induces a high immunogenic response. So you trigger the response against the spike protein. This adjuvant helps the spike protein to be more immunogenic, and they are supposed to raise a strong antibody response, yet to be seen if they also induce a high cellular response, which seems to be the most protective, particularly in COVID. And the last ones, really interesting too, are the VLPs, the viral-like particles. These are being produced in tobacco, in the plant of tobacco, where the modification, genetic modifications, make the plant produce something like the wild-type virus, which is not infective, doesn't have the DNA of the virus, etc., but it looks like the virus, so the immune response will be triggered most as if it was a particle of the virus itself, like an inactivated virus. So very interesting. And the last thing that is being tested is the VCG, which is used to be to prevent from TB, but many papers have shown that even when you are protected from TB, you can also be protected against other viruses, because the strong challenge that the VCG uses in the immune response, it sets the system to have a strong immune response against other particles that look alike or may be destroyed by the same mechanisms. So assuming the safety and efficacy are more or less the same, are assured at least, we have some issues to discuss. One of them is the cold chain, which has been priorly discussed. This is a big issue. Vaccines that require lower temperatures will incur in higher costs in terms of storage and transportation of the vaccines. for sure. The RNA vaccines will require the Pfizer vaccine around -80 degrees centigrade and Moderna -20 degrees centigrade. This is what has been tested right now. They are working on small pizza containers, they call them, where you can store with dry ice for at least 15 days. But anyway, it will be a challenge for traceability. It will be more use higher costs. I think it will be difficult to introduce this in our countries. Second, the dosage. Single dose vaccine will be preferable against a 2-dose regimen. This is because it's known that a 2-dose schedule lowers compliance compared to a single shot, because people don't go for the second shot. So this happens. And on the other hand, the storage, distribution, and the whole vaccination campaign will be more costly for a 2-dose vaccine, and it will not be the preferred choice for us. Anyway, if they look as they are more efficacious than the other ones, we may have to consider that. Third one is the duration of the protective response. This is a very strong point also to consider. We can't consider this fully yet. We can't know yet if the vaccination, the protective effect will last for 1, 2, or 5 years, but you can measure some things at intermediate points. This is what they are doing. The thing is, if you induce a protection for 2 years, you will prefer this because not only because you will only vaccinate once every 2 years, but you will produce a protective response in the whole population that will give the community a stronger protection. If people are somehow protected, the circulation of the virus will low down. So this is one issue. The other one is the cost associated with the vaccination, and the campaigns you should raise less frequently. So right now, what you can read about is how the trials are proposed. Some trials have endpoints at 2 years, a follow-up of 2 years, some other ones 18 months, not the same thing. So this is one thing to take into account. And the other one is the intermediate observational points in which you can somehow gather some information to see how they are going across time. Again, I think adenovirus vaccines will be a little bit best of the other. Sorry.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julian. Let me shift a little bit to Dr. Ngozwana. Dr. Magini just described for us some of the different vaccine technologies being used for COVID-19. What are individual pharma companies' strategies for building the required manufacturing capacity for their respective vaccine candidates? All right, let's come back to him. Hopefully his connection will be a little better. Dr. Jean Lee, some studies have suggested an equilibrium price for the COVID-19 vaccine of $15 per dose, while others have suggested that COVID-19 immunizations may need to be an annual occurrence. Dr. Magini just said in terms of how long the immunogenic effect would be, could be, we don't know. Although the economic benefits of vaccines are generally solid, I'm going to take one. I take one once every day and twice on Sundays if needed. This would be a significant financial commitment for low and middle income countries. Can you describe some of the global financing mechanisms in place for low and middle income countries to afford COVID-19 vaccines?
Sorry, I just had to move in the house because we have 2 people working, and
that's quite all right. That is the
reality.
Loud
with multiple calls.
That's the reality of working today.
Yeah. So I just wanted to first comment that $15 per dose, I think, is a bit optimistic, especially if repeated vaccination is necessary. So this is going to be something that's going to require coordinated global action to address if this needs to be an ongoing vaccination.
When you say optimistic, you mean too high or
too low?
Too low, okay.
So, I mean, this is just my casual opinion or assessment, but, you know, some of the that $15 a dose is lower than the cost of some of the mRNA vaccines, even for what's called pandemic pricing, which, so for example, AstraZeneca has agreed to sell the vaccine at a not-for-profit price during the pandemic, but at their current end date, I think if I understand correctly, for the pandemic is like July 2021, and it can be extended beyond that if they feel it's appropriate, but they haven't made a commitment to sell the vaccine at such a low price, which was, they've sort of had $3 to $4 a dose, or maybe more in some cases. But that's a short-term commitment to do that. And if I think vaccination is needed on an ongoing basis, a better comparator might be some of the other recent vaccinations that have been developed, for which use maybe the same platforms or technologies. Obviously, there's no precedent for the mRNA vaccines, but those tend to be much more expensive. So I think there's a risk that if repeated vaccination is necessary, without intervention on manufacturing capacity or coordinated global action, it will be out of the reach of many developing countries. So that's just a bit of a commentary on the equilibrium price, but I did want to talk about two major financing mechanisms which are complementary to each other. And one of them is this coordinated global facility, which is the COVAX AMC and facility that are being developed by Gavi, which could be a platform for collective bargaining on vaccine prices and access in the future. So it's a very important institution that's being built over at Gavi. The COVAX AMC and facility has two parts. So there are what are called AMC eligible countries, or the AMC 92, which is mostly low-income countries with some other additions, which are eligible for subsidized doses under the what's called the COVAX AMC. Their cost share is only between $1.60 and $2 a dose. So this is highly advantageous for the participating countries, while the rest of the cost is financed by donor contributions. And I think their short-term goal for donor finance has been $2 billion, with up to 5.5 needed for, I think, to get to end 2021. COVAX also has another piece of it, which is the facility which serves middle-income countries largely. And this is not explicitly subsidized, but there is the advantage of collective bargaining over and global coordination on purchases to address both the purchase and allocation issues. I would anticipate that it's possible. It remains to be seen because the contracts haven't been negotiated yet, but it's possible that vaccines will be available at lower cost to middle-income countries because of the COVAX facility. The other financing mechanism I wanted to mention is what Mohammed mentioned earlier, which is the $12 billion of World Bank additional finance. And this is distinct from, but very complementary to potentially Gavi's COVAX AMC and facility, in that we're still working out the details, but it may be possible for countries to use the World Bank finance to pay for vaccines through COVAX, or pay their cost share through COVAX if they're an AMC country. So the 12 billion additional financing that was approved is for vaccines and vaccine distribution, and also can be used for diagnostics and therapeutics if necessary, but it's focused on vaccines. It was approved in October and is being moved for a few example countries. This is standard World Bank, IDA, and IBRD lending. So it depends on the country demand. And so that's just something that's emerging now. I am somebody who has personally advocated for the World Bank to look forward to future needs. This 12 billion was budgeted to cover basically maybe the first 20% of the population. in client countries. And I have advocated for the World Bank to look ahead to the next fiscal year when more vaccine supply will be available and countries may desire to vaccinate more of their populations. And that is an open issue, along with the ongoing vaccinations, just even getting up to herd immunity to start with. I think there's a gap that's still there, both in terms of the initial ambitions of the COVAX AMC and facility and the World Bank financing. But I think that some people will get there in a few months, I think.
I just want to shift to Dr. Ndembe to talk a bit about the topic from a policy perspective. Dr. Ndembe, let's focus on Africa for the moment. From your perspective as a health advisor to governments in general, and of course, specifically with respect to COVID-19, can you give us some insights into the issues that are uppermost in government leaders' minds as they wrestle with a strategy for COVID-19 vaccine?
Hello, Noel. Thanks so much for inviting the Africa CDC and the Africa Union to really this important topic. So I think I'm going to write on the previous panelist, and just to emphasize that for Africa, actually, we're looking at 60% in terms of vaccinate at least 60% of the population, not 20%. So it's over ambitious, but our goal is actually, if you look at the previous vaccination program, like the measles program, at least you have to vaccinate about 60 to 95% to reach about 60% herd immunity. So we aim very high. So now in terms of strategy, continental strategy, we have 3 different financing instruments. First, what Dr. Lee just mentioned. So we fully commit financial and political support to COVAX facility. And as you're aware, there are 46 that are eligible. There are about 8 that are not actually. They have to sign up for the COVAX facility. So what we do also, we do encourage member states to pursue non-competing direct deals with vaccine manufacturers so as to have that open really negotiation. And lastly, very interesting, and this is a very a specific or really a support that we provide to member states by developing also what they call we develop a financial instrument to secure sufficient supply. So as I did mention, if you look at the African population, about 1.3 billion. If you look in terms of traditional vaccines out there, if you look at just if they are needed, at least 2 doses are needed, we need about 1.5 billion doses. So if you look at 20% only, definitely we're not gonna cover the need for Africa with that ambitious really program to support or to vaccinate about 60%. So as part of that, a couple of weeks ago now, the member state actually kind of launched a consortium, a tax team with the aim really to mobilize resources to access and procure more vaccine doses for the continent. So as part of that initiative, we have secured about $5 billion US to be able to cover the extra doses that will be required for the continent. I think the entire, actually, I mean, the full amount needed will be about 12 billion doses. We will definitely be requiring member states to contribute about 7 billion doses, so $7 billion US to be able to cover the 60% that I did mention. So you can see there's a vision and a continental strategy to really being able to secure vaccine doses for Africa. So I think that's the thing. So the questions, back to the question, really, I think access, procurement, and then supply for vaccines is really the top priority for the continent now. As in addition to what Dr. Pate did mention, delivery, distributions, and ensuring also that we engage the community. So that's very important. So having those vaccine doses and also being involved in actually community engagement and risk communication will be key in actually being able to roll out some of these vaccines when they become available, safe and efficacious vaccine become available for the continent. Over to you, Noah.
Follow up. So it seems that Africa has been able to avoid the worst of the impact of COVID-19 compared to other regions. How is that affecting the will, the engagement in terms of a COVID-19 strategy? Is it lowering that will? Is there an impact?
Well, I think we're doing. You did mention really. I mean, as a continent, we're doing very well, but we're cautiously optimistic that things are going to go right as we actually we're moving into this extremely unprecedented pandemic. So basically, we started from, there are several initiatives, which I'm just going to limit it to the vaccine strategy here, which could actually explain what I've just mentioned earlier. So we developed, I think, a a continental strategy, which the vaccine strategy rides on one of the key pillars, actually, on prevention. Yeah, so they are now, for the vaccine strategy endorsed by the head of state and government, we have a very clear plan with their 3 key pillars. The first one is really to accelerate African involvement in clinical trial development, which we're seeing that already on the continent. There are several clinical trials that are ongoing. The AstraZeneca, Mrna, and other platforms that are currently ongoing, and even the Pfizer ones. So first, we launched a consortium. First, there was a continental virtual conference that actually we had 3,000 participants and delegates on the continent to really discuss the way forward on vaccines. So following that, the consortium was launched, and that consortium was actually aiming, as mentioned earlier, to accelerate African involvement into clinical trial. Then the second pillar, which I did mention in your first questions, is really around ensuring that Africa has access to sufficient vaccine supply. So you know that we didn't want history to repeat itself. So under that second pillar, you have issues around access, financing, and procurement. And already that key really achievement I did mention, we were able to secure about 5 billion doses, $5 billion US, to be able to cover that in terms of extra doses that will be required for the continent. The manufacturing capacity, which is something we're not talking, that we're not really bringing that on in this discussion probably at this stage, really to be sure that we foster really capacity for Africa to be able to really being able to produce human vaccines in the short and long term. Lastly, as part of the third pillar of the Africa vaccine strategy, we have issues around regulatory, issues around delivery, which we all know that's going to be, if we stand by where we have the mRNA vaccine so far, we're going to require at least a -70 or -20. It will be challenging in terms of logistics. And lastly, uptake. As part of that, Africa CDC launched what we call a vaccine perception survey in about 15 member states, and so far very encouraging. And the questions that really we would like to know, and which is the more important, if a vaccine, a COVID vaccine, safe and efficacious, becomes available, would you take it? We have a very good response from Africa. It's about 81% who say yes. So I think it's very encouraging for us as a continent, and shows that we're really on the right path. Thanks, and over to you, Noah.
Excellent, excellent. I want to shift back to Dr. Magini to get a Latin American perspective. Generally, how is the continent faring with respect to COVID-19? And from your perspective in Argentina, what are some of the elements of the continent strategy for a COVID-19 vaccine?
Okay, so generally, Latin America and the continent, we are not doing so good yet. It's a very uneven territory. We have different kind of policies. Some countries have no quarantine at all. Some others, like Argentina, are experiencing very long quarantines. And yet 4 out of 10 around the world, of the countries with the higher numbers of deaths per million of inhabitants are from Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, Chile included. So going to the strategy in Argentina, Brazil, in most of the countries, we are moving forward to advanced purchase commitments with different companies, the biggest companies that are right now finishing their phase 3 trials, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, CanSino, Sinopharm, Gamaleya even. So we expect to have some access to vaccines in the next 6 months or so. And this will help us to vaccinate our most vulnerable population and also the people that are working in health, physicians, etc. The other agreements that are being also settled is the local production, Brazil and Argentina at least, of some of these vaccines in facilities in our territory. So this is expected to give us and allow us to increase the access to vaccination throughout Latin America. And this may be also the beginning of an industry that comes up with original vaccines in our territories, with what I think will be most valuable in the middle and long term, because we will have different strains of different viruses that we may have to tackle around here. So having local facilities, I think, would be very important. And in that respect, in particularly, developing our own local vaccines, there are quite a few efforts that are pretty good technologies, really good groups, scientific groups that are reaching phase 1 right now. So I hope in the next years we will have some local vaccines also that I think may help us to get rid of our own strains of this virus.
If you were to pick a country or region that you are more familiar with, which elements of that COVID-19 vaccine strategy would you consider to be well developed and appropriate? Which elements, the reverse, least developed rather, and potentially problematic?
Okay, so I think we have made a big progress in this purchase of vaccines in advance. And I think we will cover by that around, if everything goes right, we will cover around our own population. I mean, if we have 40 million people, we may get around 20 million to vaccinate.
This is in Argentina?
I'm speaking about Argentina, yes. Mm-hmm. And I think we will be not as the developed countries, but we will have some vaccines to work with, at least for some the more the elders and people with some kind of big risk to get the critical disease. I think it will be very important to move forward in a better monitoring of the local strains and the local cases. We are not having enough analysis tests done in our population. We are, in Argentina in particular, we are pretty bad at that. So we can't follow.
Why is that crucial?
It's crucial because if you don't know how much people is being infected, and if you can't recruit these people to get the tests to see which strains are running in our territories, you can't prepare for what is going to happen. Take for example what's going on in Denmark. They've seen something with the I don't remember the name of these little animals.
Mink, I think it was mink.
The minks, yes, they've seen something in minks. Minks are pretty, they grow in big groups. They could replicate the new strains very fast, and they can move to humans fast enough so you can have an outbreak there with a new strain that could be dangerous in the future. Something's going on with one strain in Scotia, in particularly, which is a strain that may somehow be protected against the immune response to the prior strain. So you have to look for these things. If you're going to be prepared for the next one, you have to locally analyze which strains you have. So I think that will be really important.
Shifting back to you, Dr. Lee, as you look out both in terms of global and regional financing for procuring vaccines and assuring capacity for COVID-19 vaccines for LMIC, what elements of the strategy would you consider to be well developed and appropriate? Which elements would be the least developed and potentially problematic?
Thanks so much, Noel. I think there are two things. So I was actually very gratified to hear Dr. Mdembe talk about the ambitions to vaccinate 60% of the population, because I think in the multilateral efforts, the ambitions have not been that forward-looking. So in COVAX, there's kind of like you can get up to 20% under specified allocation rules, and you can request more than that, but the allocation rules are not specified. So very few countries have requested more than 20% because they don't know how they would get it, but they would be obligated to pay for it. And then similarly, as I said, for the bank, that was roughly budgeted for a 20% vaccination rate. I think it would be good if COVAX and the bank and other partners could start looking forward to getting up to that herd immunity in LMICs, what that's going to require. There may be some economies of scale in terms of delivery, so that would be actually advantageous. But there's going to be additional financing needed just to pay for the vaccines themselves. I think also on the distribution side, I think there will be a financing gap because of the cold chain requirements. Even normal freezers for the Mrna vaccine or some of the other candidate vaccines, you still need to get them out there and in far-flung places. I saw a loaded cost estimate for delivery of the Ebola vaccine and in DRC, and the distribution costs far outweighed the cost of the vaccine itself. And so from a financing perspective, I think that's something that needs more attention, although the World Bank's additional financing can be devoted to that.
And that Ebola vaccine also required ultra cold chain technology as well.
Yeah.
On that question of the 20% strategy, Julian, if I could come back to you in terms of what sort of the vaccine strategy locally you would use if you're only going to vaccinate 20% of your population, who would you be targeting with that 20%, and how effective would such a strategy be, in your opinion?
I think at least in Latin American countries, we are following some of the ideas. I mean, not just following, I think this is the rational approach. We need to vaccinate the elder, we need to vaccinate the people at risk of getting the more severe disease, I mean, obese, immunodeficient, etc. And we need to vaccinate our sanitary population, mainly physicians, nurses, etc. This is the first target we need to get. This will at least cover the kind of severeness and death that is damaging our health system and is killing people right now. So the next stage will be to go to try to get something like a herd immunity or so. But in the second stage, this will take longer. I don't think we can manage to do that in the next 2 years, 3 years to come. And I think we will need also to know better about the vaccines. We will have something like a coverage for the next year about this kind of severe disease, but we will need to see how long is the protection. So maybe the second wave vaccines will have something to tell us about in the next coming years if we want to eradicate the disease. I don't think we can do that in these first steps.
Interesting. And then, Jean, did you want to make a comment?
No, that sounds very reasonable. That sounds totally reasonable.
And then, Dr. Mdembe, back to you, a similar question. You described the elements of that strategy for Africa. What components of that strategy consider to be well developed and appropriate, and what elements least developed and potentially problematic?
Thanks again. Noah, I think with what I've described earlier, I think we're doing quite good on the first pillar, which is the clinical trial development.
Okay.
I think where we're also doing quite well in anticipating some of the challenges is really on the financing. I think we really to develop different financing instruments to be able to secure enough doses for the continent. Where I think on the second pillar we might need to work more is on manufacturing. I did mention earlier, really to be able to build capacity around that, and being able also to do a little bit, engage in more partnerships in the 4 Cs that we usually mention in our all program in terms of collaboration and cooperation. So, but under that financing and access procurement, I think we touched base on that in the previous questions. Prioritization is key. I think we've seen out there, and we're trying to work around that as well, a framework that's definitely going to be addressing and really African values in terms of equity, in terms of access, fair allocation is very important. If you look at, you need to know your pandemic actually to be able to do your prioritization. So if you look at your pandemic, if you have more of the asymptomatic, for example, kind of driving really your AP. So it means that probably you're leaving there a reservoir, and you might want to think about it. We all agree we're going to go with frontliners, health workers, and probably those with underlying conditions, and what next? So I think it's a question that we really want to open it, being really in terms of equity ethics. Is that something that is acceptable in the African context? I think that we don't have that clear answer. We've looked at the WHO SAGE recommendation. We look at the US national academic publications issued around September. I think these are the good documents that we're trying to look at to see how that allocation and prioritization will help Africa in terms of distributions of those vaccines when they become available. Over to you now.
Just a follow-up, Dr. Ndembe, on the question of vaccines being approved. Right now we have vaccines going through an approval process that is very different from previous vaccines. We're seeing vaccines being approved after going through only a couple months. Well, we potentially see vaccines being somewhat approved after going through a few months of a phase 3 trial, and the vaccine was designed only 8 to 12 months earlier. What are the questions around approving vaccines that have only been through, potentially such limited testing from the point of view of regulatory agencies in Africa? How are they thinking about this issue, the ethics involved with respect to approving vaccines and the process for approving vaccines? Can you say anything on that topic?
Good question, Noah. I think that's a very good question in terms of regulatory. That's an exercise we are on with partners, including WHO and other and Bill and Melinda Gates. So we're trying as much as possible to be able to unlock some of these potential barriers in terms of regulatory on the continent. So I think the good news, we're also working closely. You're familiar with the WHO AVREF, which is definitely they have a very vast experience in terms of regulatories on vaccines on the continent. We had a very good experience with them for the Ebola vaccines, and they actually have to come up with a very clear, very lean system to be able to facilitate and remove those red tapes, because those potential barriers actually are they can actually, even pre or post market authorizations, they can really delay access to the vaccine when it becomes available. So we're anticipating that as African Union and African CDC, trying to really address and unlock those processes so that when the vaccines become available, we should be able to get that. So, but the process is already in place, but that's probably going to be tailored towards the COVID-19 vaccines. So we're definitely working on it. Over to you, Noah.
Got you. And Julian, any perspective on that question vis-a-vis regulation and approval of vaccines from a Latin American perspective? Maybe what's the approach that's been taken in Argentina?
The approach taken so far somehow takes what the FDA is giving like a clear path. We are taking these quick endpoints, 160 infected individuals to see how they go, how they differentiate between placebo and treatment. And we'll get, with that, we'll get something like a emergency use. And we have to make something like a follow-on. Argentina, at least, and Brazil also, they are strong in these follow-on strategies, phase 4, etc. So I think it's very difficult to see in the midterm know what is going to happen. But right now, I think we're going to have between 3 to 4 emergency use, and we'll see what happens afterwards. I think there will be many vaccines also coming forward from different kind of technologies, regions. So it's a moving target, I think.
Excellent. So just to close off, I wanted to leave it open to our panelists. If there are any general observations or insights that you'd like to make at this point and leave with our attendees, that maybe I've not fallen neatly within some of the questions that I've posed, feel free to make those observations now. Dr. Lee, any such observations?
I'm not sure.
How can I help you? Okay, I will. Julian.
Yes, Noel, I'm working as a medical director of a vaccine developer here in Argentina. That's pretty new. It comes from science. So what I feel is this should be something like an opportunity to be prepared for what we really need. And some point, a lot of analysis have been made about this. We should buy the vaccines from the big developers. We should do that because we need that for our population. But we should also try to encourage small groups, local groups, to develop our own vaccines, to produce in our own countries, because this one will not be the last one. We need a strong industry. We need to be prepared for the next ones. We need to address Zika, dengue, Ebola, Marburg, a lot of things. So I think this will be important for us as a strategy for preparedness. I mean, we are not inventing this. CEPI is already invented, but we need to do something in preparedness for the next one. And this is an opportunity. So governments will buy at least a part of what we can do. And I think we should work intergovernmental institutions, I think, may play a very important role in gathering all the options, the science, the technology, the industry, etc., to get a strong industry in our countries. This is my feeling, at least.
I echo your sentiments. Dr. Ndembi.
If I could come in, I
Sure.
remember something.
Go ahead, G.
Just on manufacturing capacity, which I think Dr. Ndembi had brought up as well. That is such a key part of this puzzle. And while there are some efforts to address that, so IFC has this global health platform that was approved over the summer to work with, say, vaccine manufacturers in developing countries, and also for diagnostics and therapeutics. But it's such a key part of the puzzle, and I think it's somewhere where public funding is needed, because it's against companies' interest to expand capacity too much, because for two reasons. One, they risk making an investment that has a short-term return if this just doesn't turn into a repeated vaccination. And they make these fixed cost investments that only had the return during the pandemic, and then maybe at pandemic prices. And then there's this other question of segmentation and their ability to price discriminate between high-income country and LMIC markets. And so if they put in a lot of capacity, that might put downward pressure on prices in high-income countries, which reduces their ability to profit from the vaccines that they have developed. So because of these market forces, I think there's a strong rationale for public investment in manufacturing capacity by working directly between governments or other funders and vaccine manufacturing firms. I know that Gates, for example, has come in and subsidized Serum Institute to put in the capacity to start producing some of the vaccine candidates ahead of approval. I think they're still in talks for Moderna. I don't think they have a deal with Pfizer, but they do have with Novavax, I think, and AstraZeneca, among others. And that's the kind of intervention that I think will be needed to ensure that we get to that high vaccination rate globally.
You had mentioned, I don't know if you want to raise it, but you had mentioned an example working with Indian manufacturers of ways that they could get financing to help improve capacity. Do you want to mention that?
Yeah, so Serum Institute has been in the lead, and they've actually put in a lot of their own money. They're not getting as much outside finance as you would think, given that they provide, like I thought it was 70% of childhood vaccinations for the developing world. So they're clearly in a position, they can do the production for many of these technologies. They're clearly in a position to be a leader, and it's just this gap where the appropriate financing has not materialized, and they're even using internal finance and taking a bet on this. I think that there are a couple of other deals with, let me pull up the name, Fiocruz in Brazil, I think has a deal with AstraZeneca to also produce 100 million doses, but that's not yet on the scale that we need. We need these companies to be ramping up much bigger than that to meet the global demand.
Excellent. And then finally, Dr. Ndembe, any last comments, general observations, insights that you'd like to make that haven't fit neatly into any of my questions?
So you did quite well, Noah. So I think two things probably I'm going to leave the audience with. First is really we like to ensure that Africa is well prepared to produce human vaccines for COVID-19 and future public health emergencies. There could be a pathogen X in the next, we don't know when. I think we need to be prepared. So it's very important what the lessons learned from this pandemic that will really get prepared in terms of vaccine manufacturing. And it means putting a lot of effort in financing, personnel, regulatory, and also IP agreements with the big pharma. It's very important. Then lastly, community engagement, because it's very important in terms of vaccine hesitancy. It's not only probably in Africa, but I think we're working towards that to ensure that really we have a safe and efficacious vaccine that at least we definitely have the community buying into this. I think those are the two key points that I'm just going to leave the audience with. Thanks so much, Noah. Over to you.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to open it up now to Q&A from our attendees. You can go ahead and type those in. We have one question already, and maybe this goes to Julian. To what degree do economies of scale exist in production and distribution of a COVID vaccine over time? Are there examples from other vaccines? And I say Julian, but anyone can jump in.
I can discuss something about this, Noel, about my perspective. I mean, not so much as Jean maybe can, but anyway, I think some of the scale production that is taking place right now in the kind of technology that is running right now is somehow similar to other kind of technologies that are already being used for production of biotechnology products, for example, for cancer. So you have the single-use bioreactors we have in Argentina this facility that's going to produce AstraZeneca's vaccine. They have already 4,000 liters bioreactors, 2,000. This could give Latin America a whole access to vaccines only with these two, because they are the way these kind of technologies are produced are quite rapid and efficient. So I think that we can reach scale with some of these technologies better than with traditional proteins, for example. I mean, adenoviruses, I mean, RNA, etc. And I think if this sector is going to grow as we think it's going to grow, I think that production, we can work with that, with and even we can change between different campaigns of production with the same bioreactor, so we can change the product with the same facility. I mean, I think that's feasible and interesting to see.
Jean, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I guess interpreting economies of scale as strictly kind of in the traditional sense, I think that there are some economies of scale, but there are forces that work against that. And some of that has to do with the supply chains for inputs. So for example, as I understood it, there is like a global shortage of bioreactors unless they're repurposed from other vaccines. And so, you know, each facility also needs to be accredited. Each production facility, if it's de novo, needs to be accredited on its own. And so there are these like costs to scaling that are very significant as well. So I'm not sure exactly how to answer this question. I mean, I think yes, in some sense, but no, there are these countervailing forces at the scales that we need production to be at.
Right. A similar question, and I'll just pose it. What are the plans for securing the availability of vials and other accessories needed for vaccine rollout, especially in LMIC? You know, so the other supply chains that need to support the vaccine itself. What are some of the other plans for those supply chains as well? I don't know if Dr. Ndembe, if you want to field this one.
Yeah, I think that we definitely we've started. You probably have heard from Dr. Pate. We've started country readiness in terms of vaccine delivery and distribution, and that's the exercise we're doing now in terms of what are actually the requirement at the member state level to be able to ensure that they have enough really resilient cold chain system for now, and other requirement. But basically what we're doing, we're riding on the Gavi and UNICEF existing platform to be able to deliver COVID-19 vaccine. So we don't anticipate much challenges, but it's good to do that overall country readiness and assessment to be able to map out what could be the potential challenges. But it's been worked on. We have gotten so far report from some of the member states, and then should be able to get that answer really in the next meeting that if we have one. Over to you.
Anyone else wanted to comment? Julian? No? Jean?
I know that CEPI, the Center for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which has been working on this issue, especially with the vials, and I know UNICEF has already been stockpiling syringes. They're the procurement agent, and okay. I think helping with the delivery for COVAX. So people are anticipating parts of this, but there are so many inputs to vaccine production. You know, for certain ones, adjuvants. For others, they require a lot of bioreactors. You know, my understanding was the mRNA vaccines are actually a little bit more efficient in terms of how they use bioreactors, so they might be advantageous from that point of view. But they have other limitations. So certain things have been addressed that are very anticipable and will be needed for every vaccine. But I think it's a little hard to, like, you know, it's a little bit like whack-a-mole, and you know, it's hard to hit everything.
I'll pose the question. I'm not sure if any of our panelists, how well they'd be able to field it, but one question was, any info to share if supply chain experts were part of the vaccine product development process? bringing a supply chain perspective to the development of vaccines. So this is a question more about ultimately to ensure that vaccines can be used. Was a supply chain perspective introduced early on in the design of these vaccines so as to support their use? Julian, you seemed ready to respond.
No, I'm not an expert in this field, but anyway, there has been advances in the last decade in the pharmaceutical industry, and there has been many papers published already in bringing to the table all the questions across the production of some kind of product to the first discussion to the table. So I think, I don't know if, I think not, I think that logistics and supply chain are right now not discussing the terms of production and the strategic developments of pharmaceutical companies. But I think if we need 7 billion vaccines for the world, I think they should.
Supply chain is always the guy on the outside asking for a table, for a seat at the table. Jean, I don't know if you had a comment, reaction.
No, I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is that the very large firms, so Pfizer, for example, have people whose entire careers are to deal with these issues, right? So it'll be really interesting to see how Pfizer and Moderna are able to scale given their relative kind of histories of producing at scale and their in-house expertise on supply chain issues. Yeah, I mean, there are people whose entire jobs is to make this magic happen,
Yeah. One question posed against Moderna is that they don't have a history of producing at the scale, whereas others do. And you may want to do it, but it's not so easy to pull it off. Dr. Ndebi, I don't know if you had a comment or reaction to that question.
No, absolutely. I think it's very important to involve the supply chain expert into this. It's very important. I think there's one of the slide that was probably presented there. If you could see that from the McKinsey report and then DHL, it was very clear. If you have a global prospect, I mean, in terms of knowing that you're going to probably very warm areas like in the global south, you're really going to think in terms of logistics, how to get some of these vaccines over there. I think issues around warehousing, distribution, in fact, even the regulatory, we've foreseen that custom clearance on its own, are going to be a challenging, kind of going to be one of the key barriers when we start looking at low middle income countries. So those things are definitely, I'm sure, they may have probably anticipated that during the conceptual framework and then the characterization of the vaccine that's probably going to be out there. I think it's very important to get them involved from conception to probably the end product. Over to you.
Then I think one last question that we have here, very specific to local distribution. Julian, I think you mentioned using dry ice as a potential option, and this person is raising that, handling dry ice would be very challenging, both from a training and they claim a regulatory angle as well. Even specific to that, countermeasure, are some actions being taken to address this issue? You could probably lump that with other local changes in the supply chain that may be needed to handle specific vaccine problems. Are folks taking action to address some of these issues that may be presented by specific countermeasures needed for potential COVID-19 vaccines? Let me throw it open. Julian, I don't know if you want to take that.
I am not aware that government, at least here in South America, are taking countermeasures in this regard. What I feel is that traceability will be really difficult. You can open these containers twice a day. You have to refill the dry ice every 5 days. So I think it will be really difficult. I can't imagine the way we can do that here in Latin America. But anyway, no, I don't know if if the government is addressing this issue yet.
Gotcha. Dr. Ndembe?
I think that's going to be extremely challenging over here. So I can give you the experience of probably one of the states, probably somewhere else in Africa, where you can barely get a dry ice. I mean, it makes it's difficult. They might really rely on breweries probably to get maybe 10 kgs, but how it's going to serve probably the thousand people within that geographic catchment? That's the most complex question probably. And then the second thing, it's also trying to look at the healthcare system. And also, in Africa in general, so you have like 3 tiers, and then the rural areas really, you can definitely, you can have a refrigerator, but getting access with, getting dry ice, moving it to those rural areas is going to be extremely challenging. Then the question will be, do we bring the vaccine to the people or the people to the vaccine? So we really want to decide that and see exactly. It's quite easy when the system is streamlined and everything, but think about, the logistics, things about the population, and then what really we'll try to achieve with that. That's very important. So with my experience, again, well, you're right. Handling dry ice is quite a bit challenging. It's not just getting the dry ice, but it's also really being sure that those that are actually handling that, they have appropriate training. That's another layer of complexity. So I think that those are the key points and key challenges that I can foresee from low middle income country if we're going to move that part. Over to you.
Thank you. So just looking at time, this has been a fascinating discussion. I send apologies to the attendees from Dr. Ngoswana, was having issues connecting. He was, as I mentioned earlier, going to be our manufacturing expert. And so that was why this conversation kind of lacked that emphasis and that expertise. But still, I think we managed to have an excellent discussion here. Excellent questions. Just want to thank all our panelists again, Dr. Jean Lee, Dr. Julian Magini, Dr. Nikes Ndembe, for participating. And I'll give you an applause, which if I could put on echo would sound like the 200 or so attendees that we have listening in. Thank you all very much, and hope you'll hang out with us later on. If not, good morning, good evening, and good night. Thanks.